Hi, PF debaters. Congratulations on a amazing tournament this last weekend. I thought everybody did an awesome job for the first time on the December topic, and you should spend at least part of the practice today debriefing and helping those who are going to go to the tournaments this weekend at Vermilion and the following weekend for the overnight in Medina. I wanted to just also get you started on the topic for January. Resolved United Nations peacekeepers should have the power to engage in offensive operations. I don't think this is a particularly good topic. It's sort of timely. There's some stuff in the news that I can talk about in a few minutes that'll mean it's pretty easy to research. There's a good amount of information. I think there's a pretty big neg bias on this topic in the literature. There are going to be a few pro arguments. There'll probably be good evidence for them, but the pro arguments are fairly limited. There's a lot of con arguments. So the con can give you more diverse arguments, and it can also give you some really good evidence too. I would spend some time prepping strong pros because I think the con will become easier to most of you, and is just an easier argument to make. The words you have to define are two in this topic. UN peacekeeping operation that's a term of art. There are specific things that are designated as UN peacekeeping operations. If you go to that link on the UN website, you can find them. There are currently 16 going on. A UN peacekeeping operation has to be given out by the United Nations Security Council. There are very specific rules that govern them. And in the present, until very recently, those rules included not engaging in offensive operations. Offensive operations mean like using guns to fight back when you are attacked, and potentially using guns to defend people. Of the 16 peacekeeping operations, very few of the current 16 are in conflict zones. You'll see a lot, like Haiti is a rebuilding mission. There's a peacekeeping operation in the Golan Heights that just to keep Syria and Israel from fighting over that territory. The two that are in open, hot conflicts are in Mali and in the Congo. The mission in the Congo has been going on for, God, I can't tell you how long, 20 years, 15 years at least. The one in Mali has been going on a much shorter term, but both of these are essentially civil wars. And the United Nations is there in an effort to try to sort of bring peace. There's a lot of sort of logistical debates about when should the United Nations send in peacekeepers. A peacekeeper seems to imply that peace already exists, and you're just keeping the peace, in which case you probably don't have to do much fighting. You're just sort of keeping the parties separate and trying to build some sort of stability. The problem in Mali and the Congo is that there is no peace to keep. And the United Nations, because the Security Council has decided to send in troops, has decided to put the UN peacekeepers in the middle of these open civil wars. And that's where the problem comes in, because peacekeepers they're not allowed to fight back. So when peacekeepers are attacked, or when peacekeepers see conflict going on, in the past they've not been in a position to do much about it. And this caused a lot of ethical issues, which we'll talk about in 1 second. The UN had a mission in Rwanda in the 1990s, and in Srebrenica, which is a specific place in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In the 1990s, these were both situations where you had genocide. In Rwanda, it was a conflict between the I'm going to get the names wrong. I haven't looked this part up yet. The Hutsis and the Tutus, or the Tutsis and the Hutus, I forget the exact names, but those were the two warring groups. In Srebrenica, the conflict was between the Bosnians and the Serbs. In both places, there was clear evidence of ethnic cleansing. Rwanda was a full-out genocide. It was hundreds of thousands of people. Srebrenica was smaller. But in both circumstances, there were UN personnel on the ground who watched these things happen, but because their mandate from the Security Council did not give them permission to act, they didn't do anything about it. Maybe they documented it, but that's the extent of what they did. They didn't act to defend the people who were the targets of this violence. And I think that you can make the case that this is the number one reason why they should have offensive operations, is so that they could not make these mistakes and potentially prevent other problems that are happening in the present. So the AF is going to talk a lot about Rwanda and Srebrenica. The con on this topic is going to need to be able to argue that having offensive operations would not have helped in these two historical circumstances. If I think about pro-arguments, the reasons why we should give them offensive operations is to defend themselves, first and foremost, right? And you'll find examples of where peacekeepers have been caught in the crossfire and they're not able to act. The other issue that we have is, and this is particularly true of the Congo. I mean, the Congo has been a mess for 20 years. There are like sort of roving bands of warlords that are fighting with each other. The country has essentially no control over the eastern part of its own territory. This is a place where superpowers don't want to get involved. Like the U.S. isn't getting involved. There was a brief moment in that Coney 2012 internet sensation that came up where they talked about it. But for the most part, superpowers have very little interest in this conflict, even though millions of people are dying over the course of a decade because of the lack of infrastructure and because of the active killing. The United Nations is a way to get resolution to these issues. And the reason this is in the news right now is because the United Nations just recently decided to arm peacekeepers, a battalion of peacekeepers, and send them into the Congo mission in an effort to demilitarize the area and take weapons away from warlords. If that work wasn't done by the UN, it probably wouldn't be done at all, given the realities of how the globe works. And that could potentially be a big positive area as a way to resolve the conflict in the Congo. Another reason to do this is maybe this sets the precedent of a more powerful and robust United Nations that has, as an international organization, that can actually do something. These peacekeeping missions have been criticized because in reality they don't do much, because they're not allowed to do much. But maybe if we create essentially an international army that can go in and take action when necessary, that might be a positive development for world peace if we empower those nations to do things like that. Talking about the con, which I said is I think the better side in this debate, at least in terms of, maybe it's not the right side, but at least in terms of the evidence that's available, it's going to be the better side. It seems like remember, these peacekeepers come from individual countries, so arming them under the mission of the United Nations, it seems to like destroy the sovereignty of nations. To sort of say, hey, I'm going to send American soldiers and give them weapons, but they answer to the United Nations. They don't answer to an American citizen. There's lots of sovereignty questions here, which is it's kind of a vague topic, but it's definitely something you'll hear cons talking about. There's a lot of evidence that says that this is a bad idea because if we give peacekeepers weapons, then they cease to be peacekeepers and start being parties to the conflict. And when the UN is seen as helping one side over another side, then that makes it easier to kill peacekeepers because they're now combatants. And maybe this is a reason to reject arming them in the first place, is now they're one of the sides that's fighting. Another really key argument is that could we resolve all these conflicts without arming peacekeepers? I mean, we could create an international coalition of soldiers that would go in and address the Congo, address the situation in Mali, address other potential hotspots. We're just choosing not to do that. Wouldn't doing that be a better alternative to arming peacekeepers? You can make lots of arguments about how corrupt the United Nations are, because undoubtedly it is. You can find tons of evidence that we don't want to trust them, that we don't want to trust an international body like the Security Council with making these decisions. So there's some really good ground here. We debated this as a policy topic, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago or so. And I can tell you that the policy topic was just about peacekeeping missions generically. Almost no one ran the argument as their affirmative to arm the peacekeepers just because the evidence was so bad. It's a little better now that the UN has actually started to do something. But still, I don't know that this is, again, I think the pro is the harder side to win here. So we really need to focus on getting good pros written. One last thing I would point out, and to do that I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the slideshow. If you look at the wording of the topic, it says United Nations peacekeepers should be the ones to engage in the offensive operations. I'll be honest, I don't think that's the wording that they should have used, because if you look at the information, it seems to me that the United Nations is making a distinction between peacekeepers and these battalions that are going in the Congo to reduce the weapons. So like, I think you could argue on the con that the resolution implies that the peacekeepers are the ones who should have the weapons, not the battalions that are separate that the United Nations is currently arming. And maybe that means that like the examples in the present that the pro will point to are all flawed examples. Anyway, I'll be at practice on Thursday so we can continue discussing this. Hopefully at least you've done some basic research before Thursday's practice, so we can have a nice, good conversation about what this debate will look like on Thursday. We want to get as much done before winter break as possible so that we can be done with this topic and start with the February topic the moment we get back to school in January. So look over all of those things. One other thing I would ask is that the captains take a list of who wants a sweatshirt, what size sweatshirt they want, so that I can get that in ordered before Friday. And I will also send across some evidence that I have gotten that you can use to begin doing your contentions and your research. Thanks.